Hello and welcome, Kendall.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Excellent. So I really enjoyed your talk, and the purpose of this session now is that I'm just going to ask a few questions. But if anybody in the audience has any questions that they want to send through as well, I'll ask Kendall those questions. So let's jump right in.
Yeah.
So designing a remote participatory design study. Really enjoyed the talk. I loved how honest you were about how everything was new and you were kind of learning as you went. Um, as it was new, what would you have done previously when faced with this kind of challenge?
Yeah. I think one of the extra challenges was, remote everything makes it a little bit harder to connect with people. And it's the kind of thing that I had seen examples of this done before by other people on the team, but not people that I'd ever met before. Just I had seen their research done and I was like, okay, this has existed, but it has only existed in person. I think I wish I would have had a greater community. I did a lot of Google searching of how have other people done this? Does it exist? It felt a little bit too new, or at least too new to me. But I really wish I would have had a community of people to be like, oh my gosh, you've run this before. What were your pros and cons? What are some ways that I can, I don't know, learn from your mistakes and what are some ways that I can do it a little bit differently? I did reach out to a lot of my colleagues internally who would run workshops that had been done remotely that would have traditionally been done in person. But yeah, I think I wish I would have just had more people to go to and just kind of bounce ideas off of. But because it was so new in general, or at least to the audience that I was kind of working with, it felt a little bit more of, let's just try it out and hope it works.
Excellent. And yeah, so it seemed to from your story, it was a great kind of walking through it and some of the challenges that you faced. Was it difficult to convince people to kind of give it a shot, or who did you have to convince?
Yeah. Well, myself first, that it was the right thing to do, that it was the right method, because there's always that imposter syndrome that creeps in of did I even know enough about this method to pitch it? And so I think that was the first convincing. But in general, with a couple of my studies that I've done where they've been maybe non-traditional methods, so things that go beyond interviews and usability studies, that's traditionally when I'm working with my design and product partners, what's requested when they say, hey, can we do some UX research? And so it's a little bit of convincing to say yes, but is this the right way that we can answer this question? And so there was a little bit of hesitation, I think, from the team of saying, well, do we really want to just let people design this home screen? Is that really what we're going to learn best out of it? And I think the biggest pushback was, well, we're not going to use those designs, so why would we even ask them to do it in the first place? And so the convincing really was more on the rationale behind the method and why we were doing it, that it wasn't just the surface level we were looking for these designs, but it was really that level beneath it of why were they creating these designs. And I think once we aligned everyone around that why, that this method was just a way to get us there, we seemed to have a lot of folks on board. We also included some things that were familiar too. We started off with an interview at the beginning of each session. So there was a little bit of familiarity of, okay, this is running how research normally runs. It's not totally, brand new and I feel uncomfortable observing. And then that's another piece is having the team sit in and observe. I think, it becomes less of me being that translator of, I talked to some people, I created a report, and now I'm sharing it out to you, but really kind of bringing them in and almost convincing them that way too. But I did have it in my back pocket of, oh my gosh, if this completely fails, I'll need to have a nice backup plan so that I can still have the team on board and they'll still ask for research.
Great. And that was the interviews up front. Was that your backup, or what was your backup plan?
I think it would have ended up being having some design. So our design team already had design ideas. And that was something that, I thought about, well, should we just show the ideas? But I wanted to make sure that we weren't relying too much on our own assumptions. It's easy to design for the ideal user and the ideal use case, especially when you're sitting at home and designing only with Figma and not with real people. And so I wanted to make sure that I could give that opportunity for people to tell us what mattered most to them, show us what mattered most to them, But if this completely failed and it really wasn't going to get us those insightful data points that we were looking for, it was still going to be worthwhile to put these concepts in front of users, talk to them, get a little bit of feedback from them. But I just felt like there was more opportunity that we could have explored. And I think it ended up being really beneficial for our team.
Great. And so you mentioned that some people were quite kind of, they almost rebuilt the existing UI. So how much were you able to, how did you try to coax people out of that comfort zone of just, okay, when I open up the app, this is what I see, so this is what I'm familiar with, to try to really get an understanding of, well, what could it be?
Yeah, well, you know, what was interesting about that was we actually, after designing the screen, I'd ask a question of, well, how do you think this compares to your current experience? And that's the moment that they would look and say, oh my gosh, it's exactly the same. So they didn't even realize that they were doing this, which I took away as such a strong insight that, you know, some of these, the ways that we think about our products and our apps and the things that we use become so second nature that we almost don't even understand the why behind it. And so asking them to create the screen, even though it ended up looking familiar to them, it was still helping me understand what about each of those components they brought on, why was it important? Because that's really what we were looking for, was the why for everything. We also found some interesting insights of, you know, people seeing something for the very first time and then looking at their phone and saying, oh, it's been there the whole time, I never knew it. And so just realizing how strong some of these patterns can be that we you know, get into a routine, we use a thing a certain way. Discovery has been a big topic of discussion. How do we get people to discover things and what's the right way to do that? And I thought it was actually okay that they ended up creating the same screens, because that was a good signal to us that what we thought was working maybe wasn't having the same impact as we'd hoped. And it really kind of forced us to take a look at other different directions we could go.
Excellent. And I guess it's a familiar pushback for research. You had 19 participants. How many people, or did you get the pushback that, what does 19 tell us?
We did. I would almost say 19 was like more than we would normally do, which I think ended up feeling okay. I think one of the reasons that felt okay was because we tested in multiple markets. And so originally the study was actually 8 participants in the US, 8 participants in Mexico. And that was when we had only tested with rides users. And we saw this theme that was coming out and we were like, you know what, we should double check with our Eats users too, to see if the same theme is there. And so we actually added those 3 Eats only users to see if that pattern was there. And it was, for me, I was concerned, like, this is only 3 people. Is that enough? I'm sure that's the opposite pushback that we get of like, is it enough? And it ended up actually being that those 3 people had such strong signal to confirm some of the other insights that we'd gotten from the other participants, that it was like, no, this is really a strong theme that we're seeing here. And so I think once you're able to kind of show your team, and this is the importance of bringing your team along into those interviews and into those sessions with you, is when they can start to see the saturation hit of, I've talked to 4 people and we've seen the same thing every single time, or, you know, by the 8th participant, you're really not getting that much new information. When you can see it happen, it's a lot easier to believe that 19 people is enough. But absolutely, we get that pushback all the time. And it's one of the reasons we partner really closely with our data science teams to make sure that we can get that triangulation of, I talked to 19 people here, but look, here's 100,000 people and they're saying the same thing, just you know, in a different way.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the measure, how to measure anything. And it's kind of, even if you just get one piece of information, it can be hugely insightful if you have nothing so far. So the last question, we only have a minute, but you alluded to it was a change in strategy, but how do you solve that problem of, you have so many offerings and you only have like a small bit of space? Is there any insightful tips you could give to other people facing a similar issue?
I think the biggest thing that our team is learning is prioritization, just really getting crisp on what does the user care about, what does the business care about, and then really figuring out how do you focus and prioritize. We've been circling around this topic for a while now, and I think one of the biggest things we keep coming back to is what's our vision, what's our strategy, and if we can just prioritize and focus on delivering a great experience for one of these offerings or two of these offerings, we can start to figure out how do we scale that way. But it felt a little bit like we were kind of, we say boiling the ocean a little bit, of trying to tackle too much at once and saying, how do you expand to all these different product areas at the same time? And so really thinking about where's the right place to focus, where are you going to have the most impact, and then building off of that and taking those learnings and applying it to the next version of growth for your company. So we're still using the insights. I pulled them up today with the team. We walked through them again. They're still having a lot of impact, but the prioritization is definitely critical.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your talk and for your questions. And look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks so
thank you,
much.
Kendall.